Welcome here to this afternoon session at the Risual NXT event. My name is Bjoern Hirtenjohann. I'm one of your hosts this afternoon. This is the session about cloud, the art of the possible. And I want to quickly show you the agenda, what's in it in this session. So after a quick introduction, we talk about the technology landscape today. And then we will look at successful outcomes using migration and app modernization, followed by looking at how we can modernize apps on Azure. And then we talk about all the hybrid cloud capabilities using Microsoft Azure. Then we look at 3 examples for the art of the possible, and we close the session with some advice on Microsoft funding, and then we open the floor for any questions that we might have. So I'm very pleased to share with you my co-presenter, Andy. And Andy, do you want to take over and take us through the next content?
Yes. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Andy Slater. I am the Cloud Practice Director at Node4, which is the group in which Risual sits. So I'm in a very privileged position because I set up the Azure practice at Node4, but I also look after all the data center services. So I've got a really good view of customers and how they derive benefits of cloud, and maybe we're going to touch in a little bit about hybrid cloud, which is an area that doesn't get talked about much, but there's some very exciting technology from Microsoft to help you do that. So I'm going to start with going back to, I'd say, cloud basics, but we're looking at the art of the possible. So we're going to just make sure we talk about, things that us as an organisation have seen with customers, and I think this slide's maybe a year old or whatever, but obviously coming, because we're still referencing the pandemic, I think we can just about get away with that. But certainly, as our customers and trying to get the most out of IT and infrastructure, we've got a whole new set of tools, or not a new set of tools, but an evolving set of tools. So you've got all this amazing capability on public cloud platforms, which is also coming into the data center that I'll talk about in a minute. And the pace of transformation is just relentless, isn't it? I mean, from a competitive environment, there's a lot of pressure there from companies and trying to get the best digital outcomes for their customers and their internal workers. But also we're trying to do more with less. I think certainly the discussion and the art of the possible part of the conversation is about cost. It's like, can we reduce costs? Can we try new technology, new ways to try and operate in a more effective way, so we can move some of that maintained budget into transformation? And there's a really useful conversation to be had there. Well, the more diverse we get, the more programmable infrastructure that gets thrown into the mix, the kind of security a kind of attack surface gets bigger, more complicated, more complex. And we've got a lot more kind of hybrid models. So we know that people are all working hybrid, but also we're needing to do things at the edge more as well, which gives an extra layer of complexity. So from a cloud art of the possible, I think what we're trying to achieve is to drive this transformation. We're trying to lower costs, and we're trying to deal with this complexity that comes out of it. So I'm going to take control so I can flick along. So that's the kind of background of what we're trying to achieve. So I'm going to talk about a few areas. First bit is really on this kind of right hand side. You might have seen the guys talk about the 6 R's, and I'm not going to go over that, the kind of the rehost, replace, refactor. But what I really want to do is look at the art of the possible if we're just going with a simple migrate and with a small amount of modernization. So we're picking up an environment off our existing data center or on premise, and we're looking at, well, what does that mean if we just move it to an infrastructure as a service? What's some of the things that we're seeing where customers can save money, that can make advantage, get advantage there? We're going to touch on PaaS services, and then we're going to talk about things that are on premise, how we can use cloud technology on prem. Really interesting. I think what we see, I've got a figure there, obviously 85% about customers adopting a cloud-first strategy. In our customer base, we did a survey last year, hybrid cloud report, 302 people we spoke to, and 99% of them already had a footprint in AWS, GCP, or Azure, and that's running a production app. a lot of customers we see are hybrid by nature, because maybe not everything fits into the public cloud perfectly, but certainly there's some massive advantages to be gained. So let's delve a little bit into the IaaS side of things. So we're thinking about outcomes. Typically, customers are moving into the public cloud to try and drive modernization. But what happens is that there's a certain amount of applications you can modernize, you can move them to PaaS, you can make some quick wins there. But then you're left with a load of, I wouldn't say legacy, but you've got workloads that are running on virtual machines and probably difficult to really have much impact on, in terms of maybe the commercial software that you can't really affect, or they're not supported for something like Azure SQL. So some of the big benefits you get then from moving in. So web applications is a really good example, isn't it? The whole consumption, billing, scaling angle, which is a really kind of big win. So obviously, just to kind of, I'm not teaching you to suck eggs, but just to go over some of the basics. Obviously, within the public cloud, it's built on consumption. So trying to make the most of that is the right approach to take. So really good examples are within Azure, for example, everything's got an API, everything's easily automated. You've got different functions and stuff within Azure you can create. So making sure, it's a very simple thing, but making sure you shut stuff off when it's not in use is the best way to do it. So we work a lot with customers using tools like Terraform. So we define the infrastructure as code. So even if you've got an IaaS platform, what that means is that when we're trying to look at a test environment, a pre-prod environment, that we're not operating those 24/7. So that when you've just got a pretty static environment that you're moving VMs, that's where you're going to get your cost savings, turning stuff off when it's not in use. And that goes for scaling as well with demand. So if you've got a web infrastructure and it's still sat on VMs, stick it behind a load balancer, and obviously you've got that auto scaling, which importantly from a cost perspective means that you save costs when it's not in use. So there's some real basic elements to it, resilience and performance. The great thing about Azure is that kind of stuff's baked in. So within UK South, you've got 3 availability zones, so you've got 3 different data centers. And what you can do very easily within Azure is pin specific VMs to availability zones. So let's say you've got a 2-node cluster, make sure you're going in and pinning each node of a cluster to a different availability zone, because then you've got that fault tolerance. We see a lot of customers just throw up clusters or 3 X node environments and not actually put the definition to pinning them to a different availability zones. Make sure you're using things like availability sets, where you've got baked in fault tolerance between virtual machines, and then of course you've got Azure Site Recovery. The paired region with UK South is UK West. You have got 3 data centers going into one, so it's best to have some kind of pilot light infrastructure ready to recover into, because so you're not having to do things on the fly in terms of a recovery. But that stuff's all really well baked in. If you're not using it today, have a look at Defender for Cloud. You get some really great governance reports. So if you're working towards something like ISO 27001 and you're trying to show an auditor how you're doing against the controls of ISO 27001, there's pre-baked in reports for that. So you can bring all your virtual machines and all your estate into a nice dashboard, and actually you can bring the on-prem workloads into that too with a tool called Azure Arc, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then you've got that agility and innovation. So a big bit of going into the cloud is that you're modernizing your operations, the way that you handle, manage servers, things like patching, automation. So you get some real good benefits out the back. What I will say though, if you just pick up a load of VMs on-prem and dump them into Azure without doing any modernization, and that means turning stuff off, or you don't always get the cost savings. So just be aware of that. So then we go into where you really get the best cost savings, and that's where you're saving money operationally, and also you're modernizing the application. A really easy modernization that we see is customer moving kind of SQL Server web application into a combination of Azure App Service and Azure SQL at the back end. If you think about Azure SQL, it's really difficult to get Microsoft modernize and release features into Azure products first. So if you're on SQL Server on-prem, actually getting Azure SQL and getting all the enterprise features plus, X, Y, Z, is a real great advantage. But from an availability perspective, obviously, if you're just running an individual database or using managed instances, there's loads of capability there. So from an Azure PaaS perspective, the main interest for customers is to get rid of the overhead of operating all the components because you're buying at a service level. Even at a firewall, this sounds but it's a really good example that we use. If you've got a firewall and if you're trying to manually do that on a VM and you're installing an operating system or even a virtual appliance, and then you're managing that and you're managing the VM and you're managing the cluster, it's a lot easier to take a service with a defined SLA for uptime and then a really easy way to manage that and scale that. And that goes for the same for all the PaaS services, but app service is definitely probably one of the biggest opportunities to drive innovation quickly, because we're just picking up a range of web apps and things like testing and scaling, we're really baked in to the platform. So I've touched on these as well. I think some of the interesting application uses. So the API management service is really great if you are having to manage your own APIs, manage the security, manage the rate limiting of people requesting APIs into your service. Then the API management service is a great thing to use. We've got more and more organizations using containerizing their applications, and rather than having to manage Kubernetes and orchestration platform. So things like Azure Kubernetes service have got some really great benefits to scale that. So if you sat there running containers on virtual machines, moving to something with an inbuilt orchestration layer gives you some great benefits around just that, say, orchestration, but that availability, that managing it as a herd rather than having a pet of a server underneath and go from there. But yeah, there's a whole range of PaaS applications that is, that's where you drive the best commercial benefit by getting rid of some of that operational overhead, as well as paying for the service rather than the components. Yeah, just to kind of summarize overall from an art of the possible, and to touch on the DevOps bit, the great bit is that you've got a programmable infrastructure, which means not only from a cost saving you can turn stuff on and on quickly, but you can really maximize that when you're doing things like software deployments. So through Azure DevOps or using GitOps, where you're actually defining the infrastructure in code, you're rolling that out so you can do kind of blue-green deployments to test how something's working and then fail over to that. And you've just got, obviously with a cloud, trying to recreate this on premise is just a really tiresome thing. You're never really going to get to any kind of level of scale, and the software's not all available on premise. So you have got this real, control versus productivity, as you can see across the top. So obviously with virtual machine, you've got more control than what happens on it, but moving to kind of a low code, the functions, the power apps, you relinquish all that control and you just focus on the actual application or the service that you want to do. So it is a sliding scale. And I know a lot of organizations really, you pick off the easy stuff with that low code side of things, and a lot of people are managing that technical debt of servers with a third party application provider that has to be in a very very kind of distinct form factor that it's you can't really do much about. So I'm going to talk about hybrid, because this is where I really get excited, and a lot of customers don't realize it, and I don't think Microsoft don't talk about this enough with their customers. Everyone's driven to get into the public cloud on Microsoft servers, but what Microsoft have been doing successfully is releasing that software down into the data center. So from a Microsoft perspective, you might have come across a tool called Azure Arc, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But Azure Arc is effectively, I think of it as two different elements. So you've got the one bit which is bringing everything that's outside of Azure. So that could be on AWS, it could be on an internal VMware estate, it could be on physical servers, integrating that with your Azure cloud environment. So if you think about it, you go into Azure, you build a landing zone, you deploy Azure policies, some of the different guardrails for governance and security. Azure Arc is a way to extend that into on-premise and data center service. So it's an overlay. You put an agent on the VM. It's about £4 or £5 a month for an agent, but you get that single pane of glass. But from a management perspective, it knits it all together. The other thing with Azure Arc is that you can run PaaS services on-prem. So Microsoft have containerized a lot of their PaaS services. I'll talk about that when I talk about the Azure Stack HCI, but that means you can run Azure Managed SQL on-prem. You can run Azure App Service on-prem, whole host of tools. So it's a really, really interesting area. Azure Stack HCI is effectively a pre-built. If you think about it as Hyper-V with benefits, it's an almost like an Azure region in your data center. So it's standard hardware from Lenovo, HP, Dell, running an Azure Stack HCI hypervisor / operating system, which is an Azure integrated hypervisor effectively, but you get a lot of benefits from the same with Azure, things like end of life security updates for software. So, you get those free for some of the old Windows and SQL Server elements when you move to Azure, but you can actually get that on-prem as well, which is really interesting. Then I'm going to touch on the edge as well. So just with one of the main use cases we see for Azure Arc is that uniformity of bringing everything together into one management plane for governance mainly, and just to get that inventory. So Azure Arc is a really popular way to do that. It means that you get some of the benefits of Azure wherever your workloads fit. So straight away, as you put the agent on those servers that are external, you get that inventory. So everything gets cataloged into Azure. You get to be able to, to manage those elements. You get all the monitoring, so it integrates with Azure Monitor, Update Service, and then you get that front end of the cloud integration as well. So everything gets sucked into Azure. You can start to create policies around it. You can do patching. You can do monitoring. And there's loads of great functionality within Azure Arc to bring that all together, which is something that I think is going to be a really big part of Microsoft's growth as customers still need to keep things outside of the data center. And then just to finish the hybrid bit, so the magic really happens when you use Azure Arc on Azure Stack HCI. And we've got a lot of customers that have moved from maybe VMware environments or even OpenStack environments or old Hyper-V, whereby you need to have, for whatever reason, infrastructure outside of Azure. It could be for latency, performance. Sometimes those big scary SQL servers, when you try and move them to Azure, it either can be very expensive or quite problematic. So this has been designed for high performance SQL servers, but it acts as an Azure region. So you go into Azure management pane, you say, right, with Azure Arc, you can say, well, I'd like to launch a new VM or an app service. You go and pick customer region, which is in your data center, rather than UK South or UK West. And it can be the same process to launch resources, and it knits it all together. So rather than having skills in different platforms, if you go in with Azure first strategy, this is a great way to augment it, not only for disaster recovery and just that tolerance between operator, that fault tolerance, but you can start to do some of the exciting technology on there as well. We've got customers using edge locations. So for just small, you can scale right down to tiny little servers. If you want to have consistency, maybe there's a quarry or a hospital or something that needs things like AI decisions making at the edge, but also really bringing it into the data center can modernize it. And certainly Microsoft are only releasing certain services onto this. Things like Azure Virtual Desktop, you can run on this kit. It's the only place you can run it outside of Azure. So there's some really, in terms of the art of the possible, if you think about everything you can do in Azure, we'll just think about the art of the possible as you bring that technology out of the data center and start to explore of, we've got a customer thinking about, we've got a ship that maybe doesn't connect to the internet all the time, but can we do AI and make this real-time decisions locally in that location without sending all our data up to Azure, then bringing it out with egress charges and waiting for all that computation to happen? We can start to do stuff at the edge and in the data center. So some really good, interesting use cases to come out of that. So I think if I can let Bjoern pick up that exciting story, and we're going to some kind of proper customer use cases and examples of using this different technology.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. That was really insightful and great to hear your experience and the stories that you've shared with us. One other example, just to pick up the thread with Azure Stack, I could imagine that could be really useful for organizations who have a lot of OT, so operational technology, which is kind of a flavor to the edge scenario that you just described. So I think that could be really useful in that kind of world where your operational technology is probably far removed from your typical IT data center. So yeah, we could have an Azure Stack there, for example. Yeah. Good. So let's talk about Microsoft Azure in more detail. So if you've joined me in one of the earlier sessions, you've heard me talk about how many services there are already in Azure. I just wanted to really bring this up because there are still quite a lot of organizations who are not in Azure and are still not quite sure what it is and how powerful and impactful it is. So Azure is one of the largest cloud computing platforms, has a global presence and has data centers spread across, Microsoft call it regions. So it's spread around the globe in what they call 63 regions. They're not stopping there. They're constantly rolling it out into more and more regions. So if you are an organization who's operating globally, I know lots of construction firms or logistic firms are working all over the globe. That's something you really can leverage there. And as we just heard with Azure Stack, you can add your very own regions and expand your global footprint further. Azure has a massive scale. If we just look here at the numbers, it has over 70 million Active Directory users and was serving over 1 billion customer requests per month. That's not just impressive by the numbers itself, but what Microsoft are able to do is they leverage all these signals, all this telemetry, all this data, which then also ultimately benefits all the different products that are used. So they keep innovating themselves, but also for the whole security posture, all the security products, you leverage the benefit how customers interact and how they experience, I don't know, if somebody is trying to penetrate their network, all of these signals, all of this information is fed through the Azure backend into your individual solution, so you might be protected much quicker than if it was your own little data center somewhere else. We already heard Andy talk about the difference between the IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS offerings. It's worth mentioning once again, so Azure offers all of these capabilities within that one platform. And there are over 600 products and cloud services available. Right now, over the next few days, Microsoft has a new conference running, Microsoft Build. They will be announcing even more products and services, so it's an ever-growing and evergreen environment, so really worth tapping into that capability. There are lots of capabilities. We've talked already about virtual machines and databases. The whole portfolio of artificial intelligence, machine learning is available there, analytics, of course, IoT, so Internet of Things capabilities, and a lot more. So really, yeah, you can deliver all of your business requirements from within Azure. Azure has a strong focus on security and compliance, and that's the thing that I notice many of organizations who first have exposure to cloud. That's the first thing they ask. It's not about, is it performant, how big, how fast is it? No, it's about, is it safe? Can I meet my compliance requirements? So the answer is yes. And Microsoft have this website called Trust Center. So on there, you see all the details, and here is already listed over 90 compliance certifications. So anything from ISO, SOC, HIPAA, and GDPR, and many others are already available, so you can meet your compliance requirements accordingly. Azure provides robust security features on all of the different services and products. And then you heard Andy talk about Defender for Cloud. There are in total, I think, is it 7 or 8 Defender for products? There's also a Defender for IoT. There's a Defender for DevOps coming. So there is coverage for all of those different aspects. And again, if you're still wondering, oh, should I move to Azure or not? Over 95% of Fortune 500 companies are using Azure in some capacity. That is any sector, any country, they're all using it. So if it's fit for purpose for some of our key organizations who really have high security standards, like the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of Defense, or other organizations, the NHS, really everybody is using Azure, so it's absolutely worth investing into that technology. I've got 3 examples here for the art of the possible that I want to share with you. This is not a finite list. There is many, many more examples. So here's one. We've worked with an organization called NATS, National Air Traffic Service. They are the ones who monitor and manage the airspace above over the UK. And you can imagine, obviously, the airspace is quite heavily used, and more people are traveling by plane. So the UK, we ran into a situation that the airspace was full. There was no more free gaps available. So what we did, we created some quite exciting project using digital twin technology. We analyzed all the existing flight routes and flight patterns and flight schedules to do some what-if modeling, and ultimately we identified where the potential gaps are available. So we freed up airspace and slots so that we could increase the capacity of additional planes in the airspace. So clearly that went well, because otherwise we would have seen a lot of more planes falling out of the sky. So no, exciting project, and a good example of how, for example, digital twin technology can be used for real-time examples. Completely different story. New Look, the fashion retailer, we managed to unlock 1.6 million in lost sales for them. The scenario was, if somebody returns a clothing item, they struggled to make that available. The technical term is restock the item. Yes, physically they have the item, but in their if you order via mail or whatever, online orders, the item wasn't actually checked in as available stock. So that meant the item, although it was physically there, was lost in the process in the digital world. So we helped to change those processes, the business processes, and for them to leverage and restock quicker, and therefore unlocking additional sales capability, because items you were able to resell as well. A third example, and again, you see the variety here of completely different scenarios, but what they all have in common is they're all related to business problems. It's not just an IT problem, not about, oh, we just want to upgrade a software version. No, we're solving business problems here. So Border Force approached us to say, we want to understand how people are traveling through the borders and where they are going before and afterwards. So it's not about tracking people for tracking's sake, but it's understanding and increasing the security. And so what we then were building 4 components, so passenger route analysis, real-time reporting, anomaly detection. Is somebody doing something out of the ordinary, which of course could be a security threat, and also understanding the land and airside travel for staff. And all of this we built. And you see here, this was mainly a data and IoT solution, so using IoT Hub and of course all the typical data services in Azure, things like Data Lake and Databricks for the processing of the data. So again, great example here. With all of this, and of course we want to give us opportunity for you to ask questions. I've got one more slide here. Of course, transforming and moving to the cloud is probably quite costly and something very daunting. As a Microsoft partner, and we, now that we're part of Node 4, but even before that, because we are these Azure expert MSP partners, we have access to Microsoft funding that's made available to us as a partner, which we then can leverage for projects with you. And the way Microsoft calculates funding, first of all, this changes every year. So we are almost at the final straight for Microsoft's financial year, which ends end of June. So next July or coming July, the funding will probably change again. But to give you an idea, there's anything in the region from, I don't know, 7,000 to over $200,000 of additional funding that we can make available. The rules are quite detailed. You don't need to worry about this. That's something for us to take care of. But ultimately, this funding can subsidize the consultancy fees that we would have when we deliver such a project for you. So if you've got more questions about those, very happy to cover those with you. And ultimately, it helps you to embark and accelerate your customer journey to the cloud. So with all of that, there was quite a lot of content there. I want to really step to the question and answer section, but for now already, thank you for listening and keen to hear if there are any questions for either myself or Andy, of course.
And if there aren't, I'm going to ask you one, Bjorn. In terms of where, so if I'm a customer or an organization, I'm looking to move to Azure and there's those funding options, where's the first place that I would start? Is it, do you think, a solution assessment or a landing zone, or what would the first conversation be where there's some funding available?
Yeah, all funding is available through all stages. It can be already to do an assessment, so we can come in and deliver an assessment, and that would be free for you. Microsoft have very clear guardrails of what that need to entail, so it's meaningful and insightful for you. So yeah, anything from assessment all the way through to delivering proof of concepts or actual real migration scenarios that are funded. I know in a previous year there was also funding available for you if you wanted to run a proof of value, a proof of concept that actually subsidized your Azure spend in Azure. I haven't seen them in this financial year for Microsoft, but again, that might come back next year. So again, things change all the time. But also, we can always ask for exceptions when we talk to Microsoft directly. Good. If you are happy to ask any questions, please use raise the hand feature or come off mic or type the message here. We're happy with all kind of interaction.
Give us some difficult ones.
Yeah.
Test Bjorn.
No question. I think you're very helpful. Thank you very much, Eamon. Thanks for joining us. Good. Any questions from anybody else? Can we go over any other use case scenarios if there are any questions?
No, I think you've given all the information that anyone wants. But yeah, we're here to support anyone. You know, we love nothing more than getting a really difficult problem and sitting with a whiteboard and trying to find a solution. And you know, that art of the possible session is something we do really regularly because there's a load of technology, massive landscape, and there's probably 6 or 7 ways of achieving it. But yeah, we love to be challenged and see what we can build, and we can just start small with an MVP or just prove it. But yeah, we just open, bring us your problems. I think that's what we can finish on.
Yeah. Good. If there are no questions, then we conclude the session here. Thank you, everybody, for joining this afternoon. And if you are watching this recording offline, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. See ya. Bye-bye.